Welcome. This podcast is a collaboration of Religica and URI, United Religions Initiative.
Paul Chaffee is founder and editor of the Interfaith Observer, a one-of-its-kind monthly internet magazine promoting healthy interfaith culture, which began in September 2011. After years of experience in interfaith engagement, Paul is a sought-after visionary and leader with a lifetime of service to draw upon. Perhaps best, he is loved and respected by all who call him a friend. The Interfaith Observer is a URI Cooperation Circle. Take a listen.
How long have you been engaged in interreligious work?
Personally, it started very, very early when I was a kid. When my parents were missionaries in Asia, and I ended up, when I was 11 years old, doing a confirmation class at the International Church in Bangkok. We had a whole year's confirmation class led by Ray Downs, a wonderful, wonderful teacher, and just loved that whole year. And at the end, towards the end, one day the pastor showed up and confirmed that this is a great class, and he said, well, now I guess you'll be joining the church next month. And I was gobsmacked. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I went home and nailed my dad. I said, I'm just beginning to understand what you believe. I haven't a clue what the Buddhists around us here in Thailand believe, much less the rest of the world, and they want me to join the church now?
Yeah.
And he said, nonsense. He says, not at all. He says, you join if and when you wish.
Yeah.
And went out and got me a book on world religions, which really gave me permission. I think it may have started then. My parents wanted me to be a minister, and I just didn't want that at all. But as I got older, I really wanted to try to see if I could figure out what, this religious stuff, the spirituality stuff was all about. And that sort of began me on a journey that ended up in seminary. And my big question in seminary was, how do you articulate a faith with integrity that doesn't make other people wrong? That was my question. And the philosophic writings by Alfred North Whitehead, the process thinker, was a huge contribution. And the work of Howard Thurman, an African-American mystic who's become more and more important as the decades go on.
Yeah.
I confirmed at the same time. I got to know Dr. Thurman. I was studying Whitehead and found out that the assumptions they make were one and the same. And they were assumptions that allowed me to articulate a faith with integrity that didn't make other people wrong. A huge gift. So that sort of really began me. And I went to seminary. I said, I'll give this religion stuff 5 years and see what happens. And I ended up as the co-pastor at the Church for the Fellowship of All Peoples in San Francisco, which Howard Thurman helped found back in 1944.
Okay.
And it was the first intentionally interracial, interfaith congregation in the world, as far as I know, certainly in America.
So what year did you graduate seminary?
Something like 77.
Was it ever, in terms, even as a child, was it ever about the differences between religions, or was there something that different religions, philosophies, and spiritualities are all participating in that attracted your young, curious mind at that time?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. Maybe a combination of both. For me, it began really with trying to figure out what I believe, what my frame of reference in the world was going to be all about. And the idea that we should sit down. Well, I asked my dad after he was 25 years in Asia, I said, what did you learn? He said, well, I learned that the Buddhists have a lot to contribute. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was an extraordinary insight. I mean, that took me to Fellowship Church eventually, and out of that came a concern for the religious traditions of the world getting along together finally.
If you could summarize the one question that you think all of these different religions and philosophies, spiritualities should be asking themselves right now, if you had to narrow down all of the kinds of questions you think we need to be chasing down in the world right now, and you said, this is the question in this time, in our time, that we all really need to be asking ourselves and finding answers to do.
I think we really need to learn better, and we're starting to do it, learn better how to deal with the other, how to relate to the other, how to find out that they are brothers and sisters that we didn't know about, and that we have common cause, and that there are things that we can do. one of the toughest issues, I think, in the interfaith movement is nuclear disarmament. If you want people to pull their checkbooks out and contribute, the easiest way to do it is to have a catastrophe. Yeah. If there's a flood, a fire, a tsunami, a terrorist attack, or whatever, boy, people respond just like that. On the other hand, the nuclear threat is something that hasn't happened. It could annihilate us. It wouldn't take long. It would take 15 minutes to annihilate the planet if it happened the wrong way. So the question is, how do you raise the consciousness? How do you get people activated and connected and working together before the catastrophe?
Do you have an example of this that from your personal experience, where we've raised consciousness that you go to, where you say, this is one that stays with you?
When we started at the Interfaith Center at the Presidio, we didn't know what we were doing. We were given purview of this wonderful chapel that looks out at the Golden Gate Bridge in the Bay Area and so on. And the Park Service had said, you guys can occupy the chapel for now and make it an interfaith enterprise and so on. So we got together for 3 days, and my board, I don't know if they ever gave us another 3 days of their life in a row, but they did that time. And on the second day, on the first day, someone was talking about what an opportunity it is for us to be in this beautiful setting of the Presidio of San Francisco doing this work. It's sacred land. This is sacred ground where the Ohlonys were. And Paul Schultz, a Lakota Indian who happened to be on the board, said, yes, stolen sacred ground. Uh-huh. And everyone tittered. They laughed a little bit, and we continued. The second day, Iftikhar High, a Pakistani American who was on our board, a Muslim, came tearing into the room 10 minutes late while we were doing an interfaith devotional. And we welcomed him as he came in, and he says, I need to talk. And Roger said, well, Iftikhar, we're going to be talking all day. Right now we're having a prayer time. And Iftikhar says, I can't pray with you. He says, I can't pray with you until we talk. So we stopped the devotion and we talked. We talked all day and then into the next day. And what Iftikhar said to us was, he says, I'm a Muslim. He says, one of our most basic rules is that you don't steal. Stealing is just anathema to us. He says, but if you're going to steal, the worst thing you can steal is sacred ground. And you tell me that we've been invited here to sacred ground that's been stolen? He says, I need to know more about that before I can pray with you. And we talked about that all day, and at the end decided that we would never do anything in the Interfaith Center at the Presidio that didn't acknowledge the indigenous peoples that were here that had the land stolen from them. Some wonderful things came out of that. We invited, for instance, 20 indigenous leaders from all the traditions to get together. And when we got them in a circle at the chapel, we said to them, we blew it. Our people took your land, and it breaks our hearts. There's not a lot we can do about that right now, but we'd like to do something. And we figured that anything we do is going to be screwed up. Would you tell us how to begin? How to start? And they repeated themselves over and over and over again.
And what did they say?
They said, you have to listen.
Yeah.
He says, you got to listen, and then after you finish doing that, you need to listen.
I spoke to a Lakota young man recently, and that's we were discussing sacred land. He said one of the chief problems that we experience in the North American context is a lack of listening to indigenous voices.
Yeah.
And that's your experience.
Well, they told us that exactly, and poured their hearts out really talking about that. And the one elder who hadn't said much of anything, towards the end of the day, he says, I think the ancestors are happy today because we were starting to listen. Yeah. So, I think listening is a real basic issue. So we're starting to learn the skill sets about listening and then responding to each other in community.
And then later on, in the years after this time, you began the Interfaith Observer. Is
right,
that right?
Yes, yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, as I said, I dove in and found out that there's a lot going on and we don't know about it. So we decided we had no money, but we did have the internet. And we had a lot of committed people who were willing to work, and we had a little bit of money to pay for the technology that went into the internet stuff. And we decided to have a theme for each issue. We come out once a month, and we don't do academic papers. We are not peer-reviewed. We have kids writing, we have elders writing, we have specialists writing, we have the generalists writing, but we try to do it in under 2,000 words an article and make it available so that if you're brand new to the subject, this might be interesting. If you know a lot about the subject, we're going to have enough links in there to take you the next step. And it's sort of been a consciousness-raising effort.
Consciousness raising. That's what I wanted to ask you next. When you think about the importance of the Interfaith Observer to the religious landscape, if someone had asked you, what's the singular importance? Would it be about consciousness raising, or is it about something else?
I think consciousness raising where you get to begin, and that's where the listening happens. There's such an agenda emerges out of that. And it's interesting because we're finding that all sorts of different arenas that have this cause or that cause, we're worried about water, we're worried about migrants, we're worried about the climate. Almost all of these arenas now have an interfaith constituency. And they didn't necessarily intend to start out that way. But what we're finding is that whereas the religious traditions, I may have trouble, reconciling my faith with a Catholic or with an Orthodox or with a Zoroastrian, but if we have an issue that we all care about, then the different religious perspectives, the Zoroastrians can teach us a lot about fire.
Yeah.
Fire is at the heart. We had the big fire on the altar at a Zoroastrian celebration at the Presidio one time, and I'm sure glad that the fire department didn't show up. We had people in the wings with fire retardant.
Just in case.
Yeah. Each of the traditions has so much to offer. Yeah. And sometimes it's the same thing, sometimes it's not. But it's rich when we start to share. And the multiple perspectives that multi-faith offers you means that the effort to work on climate or to work on migrants or to work on refugees is so much stronger if we can get the different traditions on the same page. Yeah. And so that's part of what we're trying to do. Not to diminish any tradition. Yeah. In fact, we think that the diversity is what enriches us. We're not out there for agreement. Mm-hmm. We're out there to work together. And along the way, we're going to find out, wow, what those Hindus do when they celebrate. Yeah. It's just beyond belief. Yeah. We had such a good time when we were in India during Holi, and so on. Go to Mexico during the Guadalupe, celebrations. It's very, very rich. And then there comes with that mandate to improve the world, to heal the world.
Yeah, the theologian John Stendhal, or Christopher Stendhal, actually.
Right, yes, wonderful man.
Yeah, noted that we all can experience what he called holy envy when we're in relationships with others.
Yeah. So
you may have something in your religious or philosophical, spiritual tradition that I don't have.
Right, right.
I don't necessarily want to co-opt it, but I can't help but admire it to the point of a kind of,
and being enriched by it.
Being enriched, yeah. And not wanting to over-control it or own it.
No.
But recognizing that the beauty of it is also in the fact that it doesn't come from me. It belongs to another tradition.
Absolutely.
And now I'm able to participate in some degree.
Yeah.
And also listening well to how others participate in their own ritual is a way of participating.
Absolutely. Kneeling down and praying with Muslims in a mosque is a transforming experience.
Yeah.
And maybe someone will say, well, you've really denied your own tradition and you've become a heretic.
I was going to ask you, what do you have to forfeit to do that? If I want to pray with a friend of mine who's Muslim, or if I want to attend a fire worship service with Zoroastrians, what do I have to sacrifice to get there?
Maybe your pride, maybe your preconceptions, maybe your bias, maybe the stereotypes you carried around all your life about Muslims. You may have to give some of that stuff up. That can happen when you learn how to listen well.
If you would like to know more about United Religion's initiative, read stories of interfaith in action, visit www.uri.org. And to learn more about Religica and our allies, take a look at www.religica.org. Thanks.